To get analysis, TK Pooe is a public policy specialist at the Wits School of Governance. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, TK. So it's being said that beyond its good governance, the DA needs to show South Africans how the country would look under its management. So I'd like to hear your opinion, given the speeches given by the two contenders for federal leader, John Steenhuisen and Dr. Mpopaladze. Has such a picture been painted successfully?
No, evening. Thanks for having me. Look, I'll say it's mildly been presented. By that I mean, one is still waiting to hear what is this new platform the DA is going to give us. Because I think what the DA, unfortunately, always seems to fall in between. They seem to almost overlook the problems and start speaking about the ANC. When you tune into any content, what you want to hear is what is the vision of the DA. Now, we know the normal story is, look, where we govern better. They tell us a story about the Western Cape, but you can always put holes into it and say, listen, the Western Cape is not as complicated as the rest of South Africa. So what you want to hear is how do they understand the rest of South Africa? But unfortunately, even when you heard both candidates, this idea of saying, look, we're going to bring the ANC under 50, we're going to bring the ANC under 40. You know, the ANC has done, all citizens know this. It's not a surprise. What we're looking to hear is, how does the DA want to address this? It's not so much we want to hear about the ANC. We live through the ANC. What we want to hear is what the Democratic Alliance wants to bring us, which is very different. And I think they failed really to bring that across both candidates. And even in the policy offering, it's always the issue of, let's retrospectively look at what the governing party is doing wrong, not so much what are we going to do differently, and this is how it's going to play out. So I guess maybe it's an issue and it's a position most opposition parties in the world face, which is you get so enamored with the incumbent, which is the governing party, that sometimes you actually lose sight of what you're supposed to do, which is bringing the rest of the country a vision to say, okay, this is a good value proposition for the next election.
Tony Leon raised, I won't say this particular issue, but something that I think resonates with what you're saying earlier on, saying the whole idea of being an alternative versus being an opposition party is something that needs to be fleshed out a bit more. And perhaps I paraphrase it. He even said an effective opposition is in everybody's interest, including the government. But I'm wondering, which is the party better suited for, given how it espouses its characteristics, its strengths, etc.?
Well, I think, look, based on what the voters have said, and I think we can only go according to what voters have said in 2019, the DA is, I think, by a large margin, if I'm not mistaken, they had about 20, and the next party comes in at 10.8, which is the Economic Freedom Fighters. So by a large margin, it would seem South Africans are saying this, and that's what they want as the opposition. But I think where I would agree and also tend to also maybe disagree a bit with Mr. Tony Leon is the DA has been in power as a second official opposition, I think, for the last 20 years. So the key question, and I think maybe he was also hinting at it, is South Africans are now waiting for them to take that next step, to say, give us something different. Tell us, show us how, if we were to give you, let's say, Gauteng, how would that be different? Now, the good thing, I don't know if it's a positive if you live in any of the metros in Gauteng at the moment, is that we've started to see what it means to be different. We've started to see that, listen, that even among the opposition party, no one really has outright really got rid of the ANC. It's been a hodgepodge of different coalitions, and South Africans have started to really ask the key question that, listen, for 20 years, you guys have been the official opposition as a Democratic Alliance, and you've been harping on about the mistakes of the ANC. But when you get into the city of Tshwane, and if you look at what happened with the Audit General's report, it doesn't seem as though you were any different. If you look what happened with the city of Joburg, and this really brings Dr. Palatse into the fray to say, how is it that you can still say, listen, the ANC is doing these mistakes? What people are expecting is to say, you guys have been seeing the mistakes the ANC has been doing different. You know what citizens want. How is it that you're not able to offer that? So I think maybe the difference between, or that, let's say, the disunity between all opposition parties kind of works to the strength of the Democratic Alliance. But I think going into the elections next year, this is also something I've picked up in the conference, I think there's an overinvestment in what 2024 means. And I think we should really take a step back and actually ask ourselves, what does 2024 mean? And I think the DA is punting it as some, what I term a miracle round, where something different is going to happen. I doubt that's going to be the case.
It's
and I think they're really setting themselves up.
Let me jump in there when you say, something different is going to happen. Dr. Mpho Phalatse started off her speech by saying, by quoting a philosopher who said, nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And the question is, if we're talking about what some see as a crunch time or an existential crisis, as you say, the question is, what is that? The issue of race, Helen Zille fobbing that off, in fact, blaming the media, what she says was a bias, double standards, saying race is not that important. I think Tony Leon also saying, if you look at what happened in 2019, the fact that you had a black leader in Musi Maimane, perhaps that's not really the case. What is the offering of the DA? And just not looking broadly at its policies, I'm asking this against the backdrop of there are still people who believe it is an issue, the issue of race.
Well, I'll try to take it back, but I will move back to your question about race. Look, my offering is that I don't think 2024 is going to be as big as what people make it seem to be. And I think that's why I'm saying we should take a step back to really understand what 2024 means. I don't think it's the way I think both the Dr. Phalatse and Mr. Steenhuisen put it, that, oh my word, something different is going to happen. And I think it goes back to the point which you are asking about. Listen, on the issue of the demographics of the country, basically, let's be very honest about the race. Now, I think I hear what Ms. Helen Zille is saying, and I think to a point, she has a point to say, listen, why is it that this question is always asked about the DA? And I think the reason why this question is always asked to the DA is the DA's particular history is quite different to other political parties in South Africa. And they always put this as well. I think they also do this to themselves when you look at the Western Cape, because the dynamic of the Western Cape vis-a-vis the rest of South Africa racially is also quite different. So yes, I think race is still an important issue, but I think what people want, apart from saying, listen, race is something, they want the DA to actually just be honest about race. To say, listen, we live, yes, 2024 is going to be 33 decades of a post-apartheid, let's say the National Party rule, but the effects of race are still very real in South Africa. So I think what they want is for the DA to be honest and actually engage in saying, listen, how do we, in a country which is not exactly normal, it's not just, look, when you look at the issue of poverty in South Africa, yes, I think now we can truly say, we can now measure what the governing party has done wrong to actually add on to the poverty of people. But there's also key issues such as how do we handle the issue of black economic empowerment? How do we handle the issue of land? And what people want is a DA to have a constructive debate about that, and not put it off as something which doesn't exist, as though we live in some post-racial society, which is not where we are. And I think that's
TK,
where people kind of do get fed up with the DA.
We are running out of time, and I just want to look at this last issue. Earlier on, Dr. Mpho Phalatse, when she was motivating why she should be chosen, she spoke about the fact that she's a technocrat, educated, and has governed the biggest metro in this country, Gauteng, whereas John Steenhuisen spoke about his experience as being a councillor, somebody who was boots on the ground. Part of the criticism against the DA by particularly the smaller parties who are in coalition with it has been that of relationship management. And if we're saying that there is going to be a fracture in terms of the lion's share of the votes come 2024, that is going to be a very important factor. Are they cognizant of it?
No, I don't think so. I think that the model is that, look, where they believe they're the majority, they do tend to push themselves around and to push their ideas across, even at the point of risking relationships. But the oddity is, when you looked at how Ms. Helen Zille governed Cape Town, she was actually very good with relationships. So that's where the oddity comes in. But it doesn't seem to translate into how the party does it. Maybe it's because of the Federal Council, which is a bit removed from the rest of the DA. So maybe that's something they should have really looked to really bridge the gap between. And just on your issue of the offering, look, yes, it's great to have experience. We should punt for that. It's great to say I've worked in the party. But none of them two candidates really gave us a vision for South Africa, which is any different from the struggles that the ANC is having to give us a vision of a South Africa post-2024. So that's where I think the problem, where I always say our political elites across all political parties have that problem, that they cannot give us a vision outside of the ANC or the problems we're facing. And hence we keep getting into the cycle of expectancy, which we're going to get disappointed in 2024.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. TK Pooe, a public policy specialist at the Wits School of Governance. In fact, the former leader, Tony Leon, also hinting at the fact that, in fact, he said it outright that he believes that Helen Zille was a far more successful leader than him in terms of garnering votes, but that the criticism she faces now is as a result of the position she occupies now, that the times are changing, and that also may determine how leaders are seen.